Hey friends, welcome back to Indie Author Blueprint. I'm Michelle Rayburn, and today we're going to explore a topic that's both practical and a little philosophical, whether or not to use a pen name. Might be also called a pseudonym, a nom de plume, which is a French phrase meaning name of the pen, alias, writer's name, literary name, whatever you want to call it. We're talking about whether or not to use something other than your real legal name on the covers of your books. Before we get going, I want to make sure I remind you that this podcast is for entertainment purposes and learning, but not for legal advice. So you'll want to explore your own plans with a lawyer if you have any questions, because I'm not an expert on the legal side of things, nor can I fully answer those questions. If you've ever wondered, though, should I publish under my real name or should I go full mystery mode with a catchy pseudonym, this episode is for you. We're going to go a little deeper than just the simple list of pros and cons. I want to explore the heart behind the decision. This is because sometimes authors don't think it through. And when you're an indie author, you might not have a team where someone points out the challenges to you. I've worked with several authors in my editing and design business where they have chosen to use a pseudonym, and those authors have not thought through all of the challenges that come along with it. And they kind of get stuck in the middle of the process. And I can tell with a couple of people that they maybe wish they hadn't done it that way, even though they felt at one point that it was absolutely necessary to do it that way. So if you're somebody who's thinking it through, let's think through all of the aspects of it so that later when those thoughts of regret come up, you can remind yourself of why you went this route in the first place. So let's just start with this. A pen name isn't a disguise. It's a strategy. And so it might seem like you're just hiding behind a disguise, but it has to have a good strategy with it. And like any good strategy, it depends on your goals as an author. Some indie authors use pen names to protect their privacy. Others want to write in multiple genres without confusing their readers. And for some, it's a confidence boost, like putting on a new persona that lets them write bolder and freer and more honestly than they would under their given name. There are other reasons that's simplifying a bit. Sometimes it's that their real name is really hard to spell or say, and they need to shorten it a bit. Or perhaps they're writing in a genre as a female and would not be accepted with a female name. That goes far back into history. I remember reading Silas Marner in high school and finding out that the author used a pseudonym. Silas Marner was written by George Eliot, who was actually Mary Ann Evans, and she had reasons for why in that day and age she needed to write under a male pseudonym. So there are many reasons for why somebody might decide to go by something other than their given name. So let's walk through some reasons an indie author might use to embrace a pen name and some reasons you might not. So let's look at the hidden advantages. First, privacy and separation. This one is big. If you write about sensitive topics, church hurt, trauma that includes people who are still alive or people who are connected to them and you don't want to have other people know the whole story, spicy romance, whatever it is that you write that causes tension in your personal and professional life, a pen name gives you some breathing room. You're not hiding really, but you're creating space to be fully expressive. Another advantage is genre navigation. You want your readers to have consistency. And if you write children's books, but you also want to release dystopian thrillers, a pen name helps to prevent what experts call reader whiplash. And you can build separate brands then. You stay behind the keyboard, but you have different voices for different rooms. A third reason might be a fresh start. Maybe you published something years ago and your writing has evolved. Having a pseudonym lets you reinvent without carrying the baggage of past work for whatever reason it's baggage. So you get to be new. You get to be new to yourself and new to your audience. Another advantage is creative identity. This one's harder to explain, but maybe you've felt it. Writing under a different name gives you permission to explore, like slipping into character, except the character is still you, just with fewer limits. And that also might include establishing a creative identity using, like, say, just your initials or something like that, where it feels like a different persona, even though portions of the name are still you. And then the last thing here on this short list is smart marketing. Let's be honest, some names are just hard to sell, hard to remember, already claimed by somebody else who has written and become famous under that, or your name is super common, like John Smith or Sarah Johnson or something like that. So you might have some trouble grabbing the domain name that you want so that you can establish the marketing. A Google search might turn up 100 other people that are not you. And so sometimes people use a unique pen name just so that you can be in the digital space as yourself. Okay, now let's flip the coin. There's a cost to pen names, and it's not just in time or branding. So let's look at some of the potential unexpected downsides that you may not think about. Number one, twice the work. You're building an entire author platform from scratch, website, social media, mailing list, all under a name that doesn't exist yet. So if you already have a real name audience, you can't easily bring them in without blowing your cover. So you have to do all the work of establishing that second brand without letting all of your current followers know that's your brand, because there's a reason for why you're choosing it. Now, if it's just to be creative and fun, then obviously that's different because you're not going to be so worried about blowing your cover as if there are real reasons for having to have a pseudonym. The second thing is legal and financial red tape. Amazon and Ingram Spark don't care what the name is on your cover, they care who's getting paid. So if your pen name isn't tied to a legal business name, things get messy. Royalties, taxes, contracts, it's all doable, but you need a system because it's you as the real person that's establishing that account, who's registering the copyright, who's getting paid the royalties. It is not that pseudonym unless that's a legal name you have claimed and established, like a presence with the IRS and stuff like that. The third thing to think about is a recognition gap. Let's say your book blows up, you're a bestseller, you're on all the lists, and your name is trending. That's what we all wish for, right? So let's imagine that happens, but your friends and family or your followers don't know it's you. If you want your writing to be part of your public or professional life, then anonymity has its limits. You're going to have some crossover, and it's going to be really hard to just be this mysterious person and nobody can find you. Who is this person? And so there's this gap there. And then the fourth thing is that over time, this is a long-term tangle. Managing multiple pen names or deciding to switch from a pen name to your real name again, it can feel like moving your house. You'll have to rebrand, redirect traffic, reintroduce yourself, and sometimes start over. And the problem with some of this is figuring out, how are you going to do speaking engagements? How are you going to do media interviews? Are you going to be asked to be on camera? Video is such a big thing right now. And even as a podcaster, I have another show where I sometimes have guests and I ask them for a photograph. With Google Images now, somebody can put in that photograph and do a reverse search and easily figure out who that is if you've established a brand anywhere else. So what is your photo going to be if you do any media interviews? And how are you going to handle video and still stay hidden without somebody recognizing you? In this high-tech society, it's harder to just disappear with a pen name because marketing is very different now in the digital marketing age than it was even 50 years ago with somebody using a pseudonym. And so all of these are things to think through. And because I've talked with authors who I've worked with who want their book to be a bestseller, but they can't figure out how they're going to do that if they have to hide. And they have good reasons for why they feel like they need to hide. So let's just look at let's look at a story, a little bit of a parable if you want, of how this could look in the real world. Let's create an author here. Let's call her J.L. Marin. That's not her real name, of course, but she created that pen name because she works in corporate HR. And she wrote a novel, and remember, this is fictional because I'm not going to out any of my real clients. So she wrote a novel that exposes all the messy behind the scenes chaos of her corporate HR job. It's technically fiction, but if you've ever worked in a big company, you'd probably recognize some of the characters in her book. She had to protect her job, her livelihood, so she chose anonymity because being an author and somebody who's putting stuff out there publicly is not her full-time job. That's not paying the bills for her. So then came the marketing. J.L. Marin couldn't go on podcasts. She couldn't do interviews or book signings. She couldn't post on LinkedIn or social media, not without risking someone recognizing her voice or her tone or a stray detail that gave her away. Even when her book was starting to get traction, people didn't know where to find her. No one could follow her online. She couldn't build a relationship with readers and couldn't leverage the momentum. To her, it felt like cheering for herself from backstage at a show that she wasn't allowed to admit she'd written. And you know what? She doesn't regret writing her book or using a pen name, but she does wish she'd thought about the long game and about how hard it would be to grow something when she had to stay invisible. So that little story there, I tell you to help you think about using a pen name, especially one that requires you to stay undercover. Ask yourself, can I still connect with readers from behind this curtain? Because connection is everything when you're an indie author. So let's wrap things up a little bit. How do you decide? Should you use a pen name? Here's my take, but there's no universal answer. But here are a few questions I'd love for you to reflect on that I think will help you to get to your own decision. One, are you writing something that could impact your day job or relationships? Second, do you plan to write across very different genres? Would publishing under your real name make you more or less likely to finish and share your work? Do you want public recognition for your writing? Are you prepared to manage the logistics of being two people online? For some people, a pen name is protection. For others, it's freedom. And for a few, it's branding brilliance. But for all of us, it's worth a thoughtful decision and not just a trend to follow because you saw famous author A doing that in their life. So as you think through it, if you answer some of those questions and you come to a place where you realize you need to use a pseudonym, you need to protect your identity, there are some ways then that you need to think strategically about how you can do that while also marketing your book. So you want to develop a fully fleshed out identity for your pen name. The tone, the interest, the writing style, the age, a backstory. This is like writing a fictional character, a visual aesthetic, everything about it. You need to brand it so you recognize who that author name person is. They could look somewhat like you, but yeah, obviously, but you're going to need to have some details out there so that you can create profiles. And you need to treat the branding like a small business because your readers don't need your real name, but they do need a consistent presence. And so you need to figure out how they can engage with you so that you are real to them. There are some other things you can do for podcast interviews. You might use voice-only appearances. You might have to modulate your voice, but not very many podcasters will probably like that. So it depends on your story, and you'll have to think that through ahead of time. You might have a character avatar or an illustration or an AI-generated image instead of a personal photo you use for branding. But again, exercise caution because people are smart. They understand what looks fake to them. And so you need to think through it. But there are successful people out there. There are authors with faceless YouTube and TikTok channels. So they lean into that mystery as part of their hook. So that is something you can do. Then for legal, again, I'm not offering legal advice, but there are some things you'll need to think through and research. And that is like, how do you set up a separate email? How do you have a PO box? How do you make it so people can't tell what town you live in? Do you need a business bank account under your pen name or doing business as? You're going to need to research those details so you know what's required in your area, your state, your town, all of that, because everything's different depending on where you live. And then also depending on how much info you want out there. And then you might need to have a virtual assistant who works as a public-facing contact point for appearances or media requests to make it harder for people to figure out where you are and who you are. So those are all things that are going to be part of your planning for the legal part of it. And then when it comes to engaging, it is still possible to market through forums and newsletters or genre-specific subcultures on social media, guest posts, places like Reddit. I mean, there's so many different places where being a mysterious author could become part of your intrigue. So it's just that you need to prepare to lean into that. You will want to protect yourself digitally so that you have logins that are pen name specific when you're posting online, because your email is tied to something. So you need to like think about all the ways somebody could figure out who you are. And then of course you're not going to cross post between your personal and author accounts, because eventually somebody's going to wonder how you know this person and how you're sharing all of their stuff. You don't want to reuse email addresses, profile pictures, or bios that can link your real identity when you're setting those up. So you're starting from the ground up with a pen name that becomes the label readers recognize, and you probably fade into the distance a little bit in the personal presence on social media. You can still have a newsletter, post on social, and respond to reader emails if it's all done in character, but you're planning ahead and just stepping into that character as you're corresponding. And obviously, when I'm saying all of this, it means you're going to have a clear line between fiction and confession. So if your writing is inspired by real life events, but you need to maintain distance, consider including a disclaimer or a fictionalizing note in the front matter so that people know that portions of this is fictionalized. Just think about what the reader would be most offended by if they found out you were like essentially duping them. And so just be upfront and avoid saying like things like this is 100% true if marketing in your marketing, if you need to deny who you are for your own safety and privacy. So obviously there's some fictionalized parts because your name is even fictionalized. Okay, that gives you a little bit to think about. If you're navigating this choice, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Send me a message or leave a comment. If you're listening on Substack, reach out there. I'd like to know, are you using a pen name? Are you considering one? Let's talk about what it really means to show up authentically and strategically as an indie author if you're marketing under a pseudonym. If you'd like to find more about Indie Author Blueprint, go over to Substack and just search for Indie Author Blueprint. That's where all of the past episodes live. That's where the blog post, the content for paid subscribers is. Everything is there on Substack. So I'd love to have you join me as a subscriber on Indie Author Blueprint if you aren't already a subscriber. And I found out this really cool trick that I don't know why I missed how to do it. I tried and failed, and then a friend showed me. Actually, she might be even listening to this podcast episode, that in the settings on my phone, it was super easy for me to turn off the email subscriptions and have it only go to the Substack app, which has saved my inbox from a lot of emails, and I still can engage every day with the latest content that comes out. So if that's you and you're hesitating to subscribe to something, do it and then go and change those settings to what works for you. All right, that's your tip for the day. Just a little bit of a bonus for you. All right, I'll see you next time. Have a great day.